My name is Amara, and today I'm going to tell you about the day I discovered that love truly conquers all, even when it comes wrapped in the most elegant form of revenge. It was the day my father's will was read, the day I learned that blood doesn't always make family, and the day I watched my so-called relatives discover that their arrogance had built them a throne of lies. But let me start from the beginning, because every good story of justice needs context, and every moment of this day was painted with years of subtle cruelty that finally found its reckoning. I was 28 years old when my adoptive father, Charles Brandt, passed away. He had been everything to me, the man who found me in the foster system when I was 7, the one who looked past my skin color when his own family couldn't, the one who taught me that worth isn't measured by the blood in your veins, but by the love in your heart. Charles was a successful businessman, the owner of Brandt Industries, a company that had grown from his grandfather's small manufacturing business into a multi-million-dollar empire. The Brandt family mansion, where I had grown up, was a testament to 3 generations of success, with its sprawling gardens, marble floors, and the kind of old-money elegance that spoke in whispers but commanded respect. But success and wealth, I learned early, don't automatically come with wisdom or kindness. Charles had 2 siblings, James and Catherine, and they had never, not once in 21 years, accepted me as part of their family. To them, I was an intruder, a charity case that their brother had taken pity on, someone who didn't belong in their world of inherited privilege and assumed superiority. They smiled at family gatherings, made polite conversation when Charles was around, but their eyes always held that cold distance, that unspoken message that I was temporary, tolerated, but never truly welcome. The day of the will reading was crisp October morning, and I remember standing in the foyer of the mansion, looking up at the crystal chandelier that had watched over my childhood, wondering if this would be the last time I would see it as my home. The library had been chosen for the reading, Charles's favorite room, where he used to sit by the fireplace and tell me stories about his own childhood, about the dreams he had for the company, about the legacy he wanted to leave behind. The room smelled of leather and old books, wisdom and warmth, everything that Charles had represented in my life. If you're enjoying this story of how quiet strength can triumph over loud arrogance, make sure to subscribe to Black Revenge Diaries, where we explore the beautiful moments when justice finds its way to those who deserve it most, and where we celebrate the power of love over prejudice. I arrived early that morning, wanting some time alone in the space before the vultures descended, because that's what they were, James and Catherine and their children, circling around Charles's legacy like scavengers who had been waiting for this moment for years. I sat in the window seat where Charles used to find me reading as a child, where he would sit beside me and ask about my books, where he would tell me that education was the one thing no one could ever take away from me. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the Persian rug, and I could almost hear his voice telling me to be strong, to remember who I was, to never let anyone make me feel less than worthy. James arrived first, my father's older brother, a man who had always resented that Charles had been the one to inherit the family business acumen. James worked in real estate, successful in his own right, but always living in the shadow of his younger brother's achievements. He was a tall man with silver hair and expensive suits, the kind of person who measured worth by the price tags on his possessions and the exclusivity of his social circles. He nodded at me when he entered the library, a curt acknowledgement that felt more like a dismissal than a greeting. His wife, Patricia, followed behind him, a woman who had perfected the art of looking through people rather than at them. She had never spoken directly to me at family gatherings, always addressing Charles when she needed to communicate something that involved me, as if I were a pet rather than a person. Catherine came next, Charles's younger sister, and in many ways the most vocal about her disapproval of my place in the family. She was a woman who had married into old money and never let anyone forget it, who wore her prejudices like jewelry, polished and displayed for all to see. Catherine had always been the one to make the subtle comments, the little digs that were designed to remind me that I was different, that I didn't truly belong. She swept into the library like she owned it, which in her mind, she probably thought she did, or at least thought she soon would. Her children followed her, my cousins Michael and Sarah, both adults now, but still carrying the same entitled attitude they had possessed as children. the same assumption that the world owed them everything simply because of the family name they carried. The tension in the room was palpable, as we all took our seats around the large mahogany table that dominated the center of the library. I chose a chair near the window, close to where Charles used to sit, while the others arranged themselves in what felt like a strategic formation, as if they were generals planning a battle rather than family members mourning a loss. The conversations were hushed, but I could catch fragments, discussions about property values and stock prices, speculation about the company's future, all delivered with the casual confidence of people who believed they already knew how this story would end. Catherine was examining her manicured nails when she made the comment that would echo in my mind for the rest of the day. She wasn't looking at me directly, but her voice carried across the room with practiced precision, designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. "I just hope Charles's will honors the family lineage properly," she said, her tone conversational but her intent crystal clear. This house was built for real heirs, after all. It would be such a shame to see it go to someone who doesn't truly understand its history or value. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I had learned long ago to keep my face neutral, to never give them the satisfaction of seeing how their cruelty affected me. Instead, I let my mind drift to the memories that Catherine's comment was trying to erase, the countless conversations I had shared with Charles about the house's history, about each room and its significance, about the family stories that he had entrusted to me because he knew I would cherish them. I remembered the day he had taken me to the attic and shown me the old photographs, the documents that traced the Brandt family history, how he had told me that I was now part of that story, that my chapter would be just as important as any that had come before. "You know, Amara," Charles had said to me just 6 months before his death, during one of our evening walks through the garden, "blood doesn't make family any more than sharing a last name makes people kind. Family is about choice, about love, about the decision to stand by someone not because you have to, but because you want to. You are the daughter of my heart, and that makes you more my heir than anyone who simply shares my DNA." I held on to those words as I watched James and Catherine exchange meaningful glances, as I listened to Michael and Sarah discuss their plans for redecorating what they clearly assumed would soon be their inheritance. The arrogance was breathtaking. The casual way they had already divided up Charles's life among themselves. The complete dismissal of the possibility that his will might reflect his true feelings, rather than their expectations. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, a thin man with kind eyes who had been Charles's legal advisor for over 30 years. He carried a leather briefcase that seemed to hold the weight of everyone's futures, and his somber expression suggested he understood the gravity of what he was about to reveal. Mr. Harrison had known me since I was a child, had been present for my adoption proceedings, and had always treated me with the same respect he showed the rest of the family. He nodded to each of us as he settled at the head of the table, removing the documents from his briefcase with careful precision. "Before we begin," Mr. Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had presided over countless such meetings, "I want to remind everyone that Charles spent considerable time crafting this will. Every decision was deliberate, every bequest carefully considered. I encourage you all to listen carefully and completely before drawing any conclusions." The formal reading began with the smaller bequests, the symbolic gifts that Charles had chosen to leave to various people in his life. There was money for the housekeeper who had worked for the family for 20 years, funds for the gardener, who had maintained the grounds with such pride, scholarships established in Charles's name for underprivileged children. Each gift reflected his character, his belief in rewarding loyalty and giving back to the community that had supported his success. Then Mr. Harrison moved on to the family bequests, and I watched as the vultures began to circle more closely. James received a substantial sum of money, enough to secure his comfortable retirement, along with Charles's collection of vintage watches, something he had always admired. Catherine was left a generous financial inheritance as well, plus the jewelry collection that had belonged to their mother, pieces she had coveted for years. The cousins received trust funds that would ensure their financial security, investments in the company that would provide ongoing income. With each bequest that was read, I could see the satisfaction growing on their faces. They exchanged smiles and knowing looks, their body language becoming more relaxed, more proprietary. Catherine actually reached over and patted the arm of her chair, as if she were already mentally rearranging the furniture. Michael and Sarah began whispering about which rooms they might claim, their voices low, but not quite low enough to hide their presumption. What's fascinating about moments like these is how people reveal their true nature when they think they're winning. The mask of civility slips away, replaced by raw greed and assumed entitlement. I'm curious about your thoughts on this, so make sure to like this video and leave a comment below. What do you think really defines family? Is it the blood that runs through your veins, or is it the love that lives in your heart? I'd love to hear your perspectives on what makes someone a true heir to a family's legacy. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically as the major bequests were read. Where there had been tension and uncertainty, now there was confident anticipation. James had loosened his tie slightly, a sign of his growing comfort with the proceedings. Catherine had actually begun to smile, something I hadn't seen her do in my presence for years. The cousins were no longer even pretending to pay attention to the formal language of the will, instead engaging in quiet conversations about their plans for their windfall. But I noticed something that they didn't. Mr. Harrison's expression hadn't changed. He still wore the same serious, almost solemn look that he had carried into the room. His hands were steady as he turned the pages of the will. But there was something in his eyes, a knowledge of what was coming that hadn't been reflected in any of the bequests read so far. He kept glancing at me, not with pity or sympathy, but with something that looked almost like anticipation. "Now," Mr. Harrison said, his voice taking on a different tone, more formal, more weighted with significance, "we come to the matter of the residual estate. The house, the controlling interest in Brandt Industries, and all remaining assets." The room fell silent in a way that was almost reverent. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The prize they had assumed would be theirs, by right of blood and assumption. Catherine straightened in her chair, smoothing down her skirt as if preparing to accept what she saw as her due. James cleared his throat, ready to graciously accept the responsibility of running the family empire. The cousins leaned forward, eager to hear how their futures would be secured. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, a gesture that seemed to stretch the moment into eternity. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each face before moving to the next, and I could see him taking in their expressions, their confident smiles, their easy assumption of victory. When his eyes met mine, I saw something there that made my heart skip a beat. Not pity, not sympathy, but something that looked almost like pride. "The remainder of my estate," Mr. Harrison read, his voice clear and steady, "including the family home, all furnishings and contents thereof, my controlling shares in Brandt Industries, and all other assets not specifically mentioned above, I leave in their entirety to the person who has shown me what family truly means, who has brought joy and purpose to my life, and who I trust to carry forward the values that have always been most important to me." He paused, and in that pause, I could hear the sound of hearts beating, of breath being held, of assumptions hanging in the balance. The vultures were practically vibrating with anticipation, ready to swoop down on their prize. "I leave these assets to my beloved daughter, Amara Brandt, with all my love and complete confidence in her ability to honor the legacy of kindness, integrity, and genuine care for others that I have tried to build throughout my life." The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if someone had sucked all the air out of the room, leaving behind a vacuum where sound and breath and rational thought should have been. I watched as the color drained from Catherine's face, as James's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water, as the cousins looked around the room as if they had suddenly found themselves in a foreign country where they didn't speak the language. The first sound to break the silence was the crash of Catherine's teacup hitting the floor. Her hands had gone limp with shock, and the delicate porcelain shattered against the hardwood, sending fragments across the Persian rug like pieces of her shattered expectations. She stared at the broken cup as if it might somehow reassemble itself and restore the order she had expected to her world. "There must be some mistake," James finally managed to say, his voice hoarse and strained. "Charles couldn't have. He wouldn't have." But even as he spoke, I could see the dawning realization in his eyes. There was no mistake. This was exactly what Charles had intended, what he had planned, what he had chosen. Mr. Harrison continued reading, his voice gentle but firm. "I want to make clear that this decision comes not from any lack of love for my siblings and their children, but from a deep understanding of what Amara represents. She has been my daughter in every way that matters, and she has shown me a love that expects nothing in return, a loyalty that asks for no reward, and a character that makes me proud every day. I trust her to use these resources not for personal gain, but to continue the work of building something meaningful, something that makes the world a little better for having existed. The words washed over me like a warm embrace, like Charles himself was there in the room, wrapping me in the same unconditional love he had shown me for 21 years. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or even of triumph. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of the deep recognition that I had been seen and valued and chosen by someone who could have had any heir he wanted, but who had chosen me. Catherine was the first to recover her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual speech. "This is ridiculous," she said, her composure cracking like ice in spring. "Charles must have been... He wasn't thinking clearly. This girl isn't even..." She stopped herself before finishing the sentence, but we all knew what she had been about to say. "This girl isn't even really family. This girl isn't even white." But Mr. Harrison was ready for this reaction. He pulled out another document, a letter in Charles's own handwriting. Charles anticipated that there might be questions about his decision, he said calmly. He asked me to read this letter if anyone challenged the validity of his choice. He unfolded the letter, and I recognized Charles's careful script, the same handwriting that had signed my report cards and birthday cards, that had written notes in the margins of the books he gave me, that had penned the adoption papers that made me legally his daughter all those years ago. "To my family," Mr. Harrison read, "if you are hearing this letter, it means that someone has questioned my decision to leave my estate to Amara. I want you to understand that this choice was not made lightly, nor was it made in anger or spite. It was made with careful consideration of what I believe is best for the legacy I want to leave behind. Amara has been my daughter for over 20 years, legally adopted and loved unconditionally. But more than that, she has shown me what it means to be family. She has cared for me without expectation of reward, loved me without condition, and demonstrated the values of kindness, integrity, and genuine concern for others that I have tried to instill throughout my life. I have watched her grow into a woman of remarkable character, someone who sees the best in people, who works hard for what she achieves, and who understands that wealth and privilege come with responsibility. I have also watched how she has been treated by some members of my family, the subtle cruelties and casual dismissals that she has endured with grace and dignity. If my death brings out the worst in people, if greed and prejudice rear their heads, then I am even more certain that I have made the right choice. Amara is my heir, not because she is my daughter, but because she is the best of us." The letter continued, but I could see that Catherine and James had stopped listening. They were looking at each other with the wild-eyed panic of people who had just realized that their carefully constructed world had crumbled around them. The cousins were staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that looked dangerously close to rage. "This is impossible," Michael finally said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. She can't. This house has been in our family for generations, and that's when I found my voice. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of Charles's love and confidence settling around my shoulders like a mantle of strength. I looked around the room at these people who had spent 21 years making me feel like an outsider, who had just spent the morning planning how to divide up my father's legacy among themselves, who had never once treated me like family, but expected to be treated like heirs. "You're absolutely right, Michael," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This house has been in your family for generations, but it's not in your family anymore. It's in mine. Charles Brandt was my father, legally and in every way that matters. He chose me. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He chose me because I loved him, not his money. He chose me because I saw him as a person, not a bank account. And he chose me because I understood what this family could be, not just what it had been." I walked over to Mr. Harrison and took the documents from his hands, feeling the weight of ownership, of responsibility, of the future that Charles had entrusted to me. "I know this is difficult for all of you to accept," I continued, still in that same calm voice. "I know you thought this day would go differently, but Charles knew exactly what he was doing. He spent months planning this will, making sure every detail was perfect, every decision carefully considered. He knew that some of you would be angry, and he accepted that, because he also knew that leaving his legacy to someone who would honor it was more important than keeping the peace. Catherine had risen from her chair, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. "You have no right," she hissed. "You're not his real daughter. You're just some charity case he felt sorry for. This house, this company, they don't belong to you. They belong to us, to his real family." The words hung in the air like poison, revealing the ugly truth that had always lurked beneath the surface of our family interactions. But instead of hurting me, they made me feel stronger, more certain that Charles had made the right choice. "You're right about one thing, Catherine," I said. "I'm not his real daughter. I'm his chosen daughter. And that makes all the difference." I turned to Mr. Harrison, who had been watching this exchange with the careful attention of someone who had seen family dynamics tear apart over inheritance disputes many times before. "Are there any other formalities we need to complete today?" I asked. He shook his head. "The will is clear and legally sound. The estate is yours, Miss Brandt. I'll begin the transfer proceedings immediately." That's when the reality of the situation finally hit them. James slumped back in his chair, the fight going out of him as he realized that no amount of arguing or legal maneuvering was going to change what had happened. Patricia was staring at me with undisguised hatred, as if I had personally orchestrated Charles's death to steal their inheritance. The cousins were whispering furiously to each other, no doubt trying to figure out if there was any way to contest the will. But Catherine wasn't done. She took a step closer to me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you've won something here? You think this changes anything? You'll never be one of us. You'll never really belong in this world. Money can't buy you breeding, can't buy you class, can't buy you the right to claim what isn't yours." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of cruelty disguised as civility, who had made an art form of making others feel small and unwelcome. And I smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a triumphant smirk, but the kind of smile that Charles used to give me when he was proud of how I had handled a difficult situation. "You know what, Catherine?" I said. "You're absolutely right. Money can't buy breeding or class, but it can buy something much more valuable. It can buy the power to choose who you surround yourself with. It can buy the freedom to decide who gets to stay in your life and who gets to leave. And it can buy the opportunity to build something better than what came before." I walked over to the window, looking out at the gardens that I had played in as a child, that Charles and I had walked through together countless times, where he had taught me about patience and growth and the beauty of things that take time to flourish. "This house will always be open to people who understand what family really means," I said. "People who choose love over prejudice, kindness over cruelty, acceptance over judgment. But it will never again be a place where someone is made to feel unwelcome because of the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth." I turned back to face them. These people who had shaped so much of my childhood, with their subtle rejections and casual cruelties, who had taught me that family isn't always about the people who share your blood. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said quietly. "This is my house now, and I choose not to share it with people who have spent years making it clear that they don't want to share it with me." The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence that had greeted the reading of the will. This was the silence of defeat, of recognition, of the final understanding that the world had shifted beneath their feet and would never be the same again. James was the first to move, standing slowly and straightening his jacket with as much dignity as he could muster. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with something. Perhaps the recognition that his brother had been right about me. Perhaps just the desire to leave with some shred of his pride intact. "Your father," he said finally, "would be proud of how you've handled this." It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. And from James, that was more than I had expected. Catherine gathered her purse and her shattered dignity, her movements sharp and angry. She stopped at the door of the library and turned back to me. "This isn't over," she said. "You may have won today, but you'll never truly belong in this world. You'll see." And I smiled again, the same gentle smile that had driven her to fury just minutes before. "You're right," I said. "I'll never belong in your world. But I was never trying to. I was trying to build a better one." One by one, they filed out of the library, out of the house that had been their family's for generations, but was now mine. I listened to their footsteps echoing through the hallway, heard the front door close with a finality that seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. When the last car had pulled out of the driveway, when the sound of their engines had faded into the distance, I was alone in the house for the first time as its owner. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with new eyes, not as spaces where I had been tolerated, but as places where I could build something new, something better, something that would honor Charles's memory and his values. In his study, I found a letter addressed to me, propped against a photograph of the two of us from my college graduation, the day he had told me he was prouder of me than he had ever been of anything in his life. The letter was in his handwriting, written in the weeks before his death, when he knew his time was running short. "My dearest Amara," it began, "if you are reading this, then the will has been read, and you know the truth of what you mean to me. I hope you understand that this decision was never about money or property or business interests. It was about love and legacy, and the belief that the best way to honor what we've built together is to place it in the hands of someone who will use it to make the world a little bit better." The letter went on to explain his hopes for the company, his dreams for the house, his vision of how I might use the resources he was leaving me to continue the work of building bridges instead of walls, of choosing inclusion over exclusion, of proving that family is about love rather than blood. As I read his words, I could hear his voice, feel his presence, understand once again why he had been the most important person in my life. He had seen something in me that I was still learning to see in myself, a strength that had been forged in the fires of not quite belonging, a wisdom that had been earned through years of watching how not to treat people, a capacity for love that had been nurtured by someone who had loved me without condition or reservation. The days that followed were filled with lawyers and paperwork, with the practical matters of transferring ownership and establishing my authority over the business. There were challenges, of course. Some members of the board questioned my qualifications. Some employees wondered if I would be able to fill Charles's shoes. Some clients worried about the stability of the company under new leadership. But I had been preparing for this my entire life, even when I didn't know it. Charles had included me in business discussions from the time I was old enough to understand them, had taught me about the industry, had made sure I understood not just the financial aspects of running a company, but the human ones as well. I had worked summers at the company through high school and college, had earned my business degree with his encouragement and support, had proven myself capable of handling responsibility and making difficult decisions. More importantly, I had learned from him that success in business, like success in life, comes from treating people with respect and dignity, from building relationships based on trust and mutual benefit, from understanding that a company is not just a collection of assets and profits, but a community of people working toward common goals. The transition wasn't always smooth. There were board meetings where I had to prove myself, client meetings where I had to demonstrate my competence, employee meetings where I had to show that I could provide the same kind of leadership that Charles had offered. But gradually, people began to see what Charles had seen, that I wasn't just his adopted daughter, but someone who had earned the right to carry on his legacy. If you've been moved by this story of how love can triumph over prejudice, how chosen family can be stronger than blood family, and how quiet dignity can defeat loud arrogance, please make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to Black Revenge Diaries for more stories of justice served and wrongs made right. And I want to hear from you in the comments. What's the most powerful way you've seen someone respond to prejudice and discrimination? How do you think we can best honor the people who choose to love us, rather than just tolerate us? 6 months after the will was read, I held my first board meeting as the official CEO of Brant Industries. The conference room was full of people who had known Charles for decades, who had watched me grow up, who were still adjusting to the idea that the little girl they remembered was now their boss. But as I presented my vision for the company's future, as I outlined my plans for expansion and innovation, as I demonstrated the same values and principles that Charles had instilled in me, I could see their respect growing. "Your father would be very proud," said Margaret Thompson, the longest-serving board member, after the meeting had concluded. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." And that, I realized, was exactly what Charles had been trying to give me all along. Not just his money or his property or his business, but his belief in my potential, his confidence in my character, his faith that I would use whatever resources I had to make a positive difference in the world. The house became what he had always envisioned it could be, a gathering place for people who shared his values, a home where family was defined by love rather than blood, a space where the doors were open to anyone who came with an open heart and genuine intentions. I hosted charity events in the ballroom, used the library for mentoring sessions with young people from backgrounds similar to mine, turned the gardens into a place where people could come to find peace and reflection. Catherine and James and the cousins never came back. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they had contested the will, spent a considerable amount of money on lawyers trying to find some way to overturn Charles's decision. But the will was ironclad. The adoption papers were legal and binding, and Charles's letter made his intentions crystal clear. Their legal challenges went nowhere, serving only to drain their own resources and confirm what Charles had already known about their character. I did reach out to them once, about a year after Charles's death, to invite them to a memorial service I was holding in his honor. I genuinely hoped that time might have given them perspective, that they might have come to understand that love is not a finite resource, that Charles's love for me had never diminished his love for them. But the invitations were returned unopened, and I understood that some people would rather hold on to their bitterness than open their hearts to healing. Their loss became my gain in ways I never expected. The space in my life that might have been filled by grudging acceptance from reluctant relatives was instead filled by chosen family, people who loved me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The company thrived under leadership that prioritized people over profits, values over valuations, long-term relationships over short-term gains. The house became a home in the truest sense, a place where love lived and grew and welcomed anyone who came seeking acceptance and belonging. 5 years after that October morning in the library, I stood in the same spot where Catherine had made her cruel comment about real heirs. The room looked the same, smelled the same, felt the same, but everything had changed. Where there had once been tension and hostility, there was now warmth and love. Where there had once been the cold calculation of people counting their expected inheritance, there was now the joyful chaos of children playing, friends laughing, chosen family gathering to celebrate life and love, and the beautiful complexity of human connection. I thought about Catherine's words that day, about her certainty that the house was meant for real heirs, and I realized that she had been right, just not in the way she had intended. The house was meant for real heirs. It was meant for people who inherited not just money and property, but values and principles, and the commitment to making the world a better place. It was meant for people who understood that being an heir isn't about what you receive, but about what you do with what you've been given. Charles had left me more than a house and a company and a bank account. He had left me a legacy of love, a model of how to treat people with dignity and respect, a blueprint for building a life that matters. He had shown me that family isn't about DNA or bloodlines or legal documents, but about the decision to love someone unconditionally, to support them unreservedly, to believe in their potential even when they don't believe in it themselves. As I watched the sun set through the same stained glass windows that had cast colored shadows on the Persian rug that morning 5 years ago, I whispered a thank you to the man who had chosen me, who had seen something in me worth nurturing, who had given me not just his name and his fortune, but his faith in my ability to use both wisely. The vultures had circled that day, expecting to feast on what they saw as their rightful inheritance. But they had forgotten that love is the most powerful force in the universe, that chosen family is stronger than blood family, and that real wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch, and the love we share, and the legacy we leave behind. My name is Amara Brandt, and I am my father's daughter in every way that matters. I am his real heir, not because of what he left me, but because of what he taught me. And every day, I try to be worthy of the love he gave me and the faith he placed in me, knowing that the greatest inheritance anyone can receive is the belief that they are capable of making the world a better place. That morning in the library, when Catherine said the house was meant for real heirs, she had no idea how right she was. She just didn't understand what makes someone a real heir. It's not the blood in your veins or the color of your skin or the circumstances of your birth. It's the love in your heart, the values you carry, and the commitment to honor the legacy of those who came before you by building something even better for those who will come after. And that's exactly what I intend to do for the rest of my life, in my father's memory, and in honor of the love that chose me when I needed it most, and made me who I am today.